She had nothing left to lose, and that made her the most dangerous woman in the room. The night markets of Itaewon never truly slept. Even past midnight, the narrow alleys between stalls hummed with the electric buzz of fluorescent lights and the sizzle of food hitting iron pans. Amara Diallo had worked this particular corner of the district for 3 years, selling roasted sweet potatoes and spiced corn from a battered cart she had inherited from a Korean grandmother who had taken pity on her when she first arrived from Dakar with nothing but a suitcase and a stubborn refusal to beg. She was 28 years old, broad-shouldered from years of hauling supplies before dawn, with the kind of quiet, watchful eyes that street life teaches you. Eyes that noticed everything before a word was spoken. Eyes that measured a person's intentions the moment they stepped close enough to order. She was not beautiful in the way that made men stare and stumble, but she had a presence, a solidity, as if she had been carved from something older and harder than the city that has surrounded her. The other vendors on the strip respected her without ever quite saying why. She kept her prices fair, she never took credit she didn't intend to repay, and she had once stepped between a drunk foreigner and a young Korean girl barely 16, standing her ground with nothing but the wooden handle of a ladle until the man backed away. That was the kind of woman Amara was, not reckless, not bold for the sake of it, but immovable when something in her decided that a line had been crossed. She had not planned for that quality to matter on the night of Park Ji-ho's visit. She had not planned for anything at all, except perhaps to sell out her cart by 11 and be home before the last subway ran. But the city had other intentions, and fate, as it so often does, arrived without knocking. The black vehicles appeared at the edge of the strip just after 10, their engines so quiet that Amara didn't notice them until the vendors on either side of her began subtly, wordlessly, pulling back, folding arms, dropping eye contact, finding reasons to rearrange their goods with their backs turned. She had seen that particular choreography before. It was the posture of people who knew something was coming and had already decided they would not be part of it. 3 men in black suits stepped out first, their faces blank and professional as stone walls. Then a fourth, who opened the rear door with practiced precision, and Park Ji-ho stepped onto the cobblestones of the night market as if he had purchased the ground beneath his feet, which in a manner of speaking, he had. He was younger than she had imagined. She had heard the name before, every vendor in this district had, but she had pictured someone older, heavy-set, perhaps with the careful stillness of a man who had long since stopped needing to prove anything. Park Ji-ho was none of that. He was lean and sharp-featured, perhaps 35, dressed in a suit that cost more than her cart had in a decade. His hands loosely at his sides as he walked forward with the particular ease of someone who had never once in his adult life worried about what was about to happen next. He stopped at her cart, not the cart beside her, hers. He looked at the roasted sweet potatoes with a slight tilt of his head, the way a man looks at something that mildly interests him rather than something he actually wants. And then he looked at her. And something passed behind his eyes that she couldn't fully read. Curiosity, perhaps, or the recognition of someone unexpected. One of his men was already moving toward the nearest cafe, returning a moment later with a porcelain cup of tea, steam rising from it in the cool autumn air. Park Ji-ho accepted it without looking, lifting it toward his mouth with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told no. That was when Amara smelled it. It was faint, almost nothing, a whisper beneath the tea's jasmine fragrance. But she had grown up watching her grandmother brew medicines in Dakar, and she had spent enough time in the market district to know what certain things smelled like when they were dissolved in liquid. Her stomach went cold. Her mind ran the calculation in less than a second, the way minds do when they have already lived through a version of this moment before, and reached the answer before she had fully decided what to do about it. Without thinking, or rather with a kind of thinking that bypassed language entirely and went straight to the body, her hand shot out and she slapped the cup from Park Ji-ho's fingers. The porcelain shattered against the cobblestones. Tea splashed across the stone in a dark, spreading stain. The sound of it, sharp, irreversible, cracked through the alley like a gunshot. Every guard froze. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Amara could feel it pressing against her chest, against the sides of her throat, against the back of her knees. She had, in one motion, done something that no one in this district would have dared, something that most men with 3 times her resources and twice her connections would have thought through for a week before deciding against. She had struck something from the hand of Park Jiho, head of the Jiho organization, a man whose reach extended from the basement card rooms of Mapogu to the boardrooms of Gangnam, a man whose name was spoken in the night markets the way certain storms were spoken of in coastal villages, not as metaphor, but as simple, practical warning. 4 guards. She had counted them before her hand moved, which told her something about herself she hadn't known until now, that some part of her, even in the split second before acting, had been running threat assessment. 4 guards, and every one of them had gone completely still, suspended in the amber of their own disbelief, hands half raised but not yet committed, waiting for the signal from the man at the center of it all. Park Jiho had not moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing when the cup was in his hand, and now the cup was in pieces at his feet, and he was looking at Amara with an expression she could not name. Not anger, not yet. Something more precise than anger. The expression of someone recalibrating rapidly, running the same calculation she had just run, but arriving at the answer from the opposite direction, asking himself not what she had done, but why. She did not wait for him to ask. She could feel the window of opportunity, the few seconds before someone moved or spoke, and the moment hardened into something irreversible. And she used it. "There is something in that tea," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which surprised her. She was frightened. She was not foolish enough not to be. But the fear was running parallel to her words rather than through them. And what came out was simply the truth, spoken plainly, the way her grandmother had always taught her to deliver difficult news. No decoration, no apology, just the fact of it, offered to the person most entitled to receive it. Park Jiho's eyes didn't move from her face. She pressed forward because stopping now would be worse than not having started. "It was not in the cup when your man picked it up from the cafe," she said. "It was added between there and here. I could smell it. I know what it smells like." A long pause. One of the guards, the one who had fetched the tea, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, and that small movement told Amara everything. She had worked street markets long enough to read the body language of guilt. The man's chin had dipped a fraction of a centimeter. His eyes had gone very still in the specific way that eyes go still when they are working very hard at appearing to be relaxed. Park Jiho saw it too. She watched him see it, watched the precise, cold moment of recognition cross his face like a shadow moving across still water. He was not a man who showed much, she would learn later, but in that instant, something shifted in the architecture of his expression. Something calcified and went quiet in the way that dangerous things go quiet before they become irrevocable. He turned his gaze from the guard back to her. "Your name," he said. It was not a question. It was an inventory, the way you might ask the name of something you intended to understand. She told him. He repeated it once, under his breath, as if filing it somewhere. Then, without raising his voice, without any dramatic escalation at all, he said 3 quiet words to the man beside him, and everything in the alley reorganized itself around those words in a way that Amara could feel even without understanding their full weight. 2 guards moved toward the man who had fetched the tea. The man did not run. He seemed to understand, in the resigned way of someone who has been holding a secret too long, that running was no longer a category of option available to him. Park Jiho looked back at the shattered cup on the cobble stones for a moment, then at Amara. Then he did something she had not expected from any version of this encounter that she had run in her mind. He inclined his head. Not deeply, just slightly, but it was unmistakable, and the guards who witnessed it would remember it, and word would move through the district within a week in the precise word-of-mouth way that word always moves in places where power operates at street level. Something had shifted tonight. A woman at a night market stall had reached out her hand and changed the weight of an evening, and the man she had changed it for had acknowledged her. Amara stood very still, her heart hammering against her ribs, and she told herself later that she had not shaken. She had, a little, but not enough that anyone could see it. She did not sleep that night. She lay on the thin mattress in her one-room apartment in Mapogu, and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since the previous winter and thought about choices, the small, structural kind that you don't fully recognize as choices until after you've made them, when you look back and see that the path you're standing on began with a single step you took without looking down. She had acted on instinct, which was another way of saying she had acted on everything she had accumulated over 28 years of watching the world carefully and surviving it. Her grandmother's lessons, the market's education, the specific knowledge that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing. She had not acted to impress anyone. She had not acted because she was brave in the way that people in stories are brave, with clarity of purpose and a sense of the righteous. She had acted because the smell had reached her nose and the calculation had completed itself, and her arm had moved before her fear had a chance to negotiate. In the morning, a package arrived at her stall. She found it propped against the wheel of her cart when she arrived to set up at 6. A plain box with her name written on it in careful, unhurried script. Inside was a small envelope containing more money than she made in 4 months, and beneath it, a single item. A white card with a phone number in 3 words in both Korean and, she noted, in French, the secondary language of Senegal, which meant that someone had done research, quickly and thoroughly, in the hours between the previous night and this morning. The 3 words in French read simply, Pour votre service, for your service. She stood in the early morning chill with the card in her hand and understood that something had changed in the geometry of her life, and that the change had no clean undo. She put the card in her apron pocket and began setting up her cart because she did not know what else to do, and because the sweet potatoes still needed roasting regardless of what the night had brought. The other vendors arrived one by one, and she could tell by the careful, sideways quality of their greetings that word had already begun to move. No one said anything directly. That was not how information traveled in the market district, but there was a new quality to the space that opened around her, a slight widening, a different species of respect that she had not had before. It was not entirely comfortable. Respect of this kind came with expectations attached, and she was not sure she wanted to be the person those expectations were attached to. But she was pragmatic enough to understand that wanting was no longer the relevant variable. She was already in the current. The question was only how to navigate it. At 10 that morning, one of the black cars returned. It parked at the edge of the strip with the same quiet efficiency as the night before, and a man she had not seen at the previous encounter stepped out. Older, with the deliberate movements of someone whose job was preparation rather than presence. He walked to her cart and waited while she finished serving a customer. And then he told her in careful, formal Korean that she understood well enough that after 3 years in the district, that Mr. Park wished to speak with her at her earliest convenience, and that the matter was of a personal nature, and that she was entirely free to decline, but that Mr. Park nonetheless hoped she would accept. She looked at the man for a long moment, her hands resting on the wooden handles of her cart, and thought about her grandmother, who had told her once that the universe tested you by offering you exactly the thing you were not sure you wanted, and that your answer to such an offer revealed the shape of your actual character more truthfully than anything else could. She thought about the money in the envelope, which she had not touched. She thought about the man who had stood in this alley the night before and inclined his head to her over a shattered cup of poisoned tea. She thought about the guard whose eyes had gone still with guilt and who was, she suspected, no longer in any position to harm anyone. She said yes. She asked only for 30 minutes to find someone to watch her cart, and the man nodded as if he had expected nothing else, and went back to wait by the car. And Amara untied her apron and folded it over the cart handle and went to find her neighbor 2 stalls down. And her hands, she noticed, were perfectly steady. Architecture, the kind of building that cities accumulate without intending to preserve. Inside, the room he worked in was large but spare. A desk, bookshelves running floor to ceiling along one wall, a single painting that Amara didn't recognize, but that struck her immediately as something painted by someone who had seen grief at close range and chosen to render it as light rather than darkness. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Han River, the early afternoon light cutting across the water in long, flat plains of silver and gray. Park Ji-ho was standing at the window when she was shown in. He turned as she entered, and in the daylight he looked different from the night before. Not less dangerous, but differently so, the way certain animals look different when you remove them from the context of night and motion and encounter them in stillness. He gestured to a chair across from his desk without speaking, and she sat, and he sat, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And she understood that the silence was not uncomfortable to him, and so she decided not to be uncomfortable in it either. He spoke first. He said that he had spent the night making inquiries about her background, her time in Seoul, the circumstances that had brought her to the night market district, and that he wanted her to know that he had done this not as surveillance, but as the same kind of due diligence one extends to anyone who has acted in one's interest, which was his way of both acknowledging the debt and establishing that he was the kind of man who paid his debts with information as well as currency. She listened without interrupting. He told her the name of the substance that had been in the tea. She had been right about the family of compound, wrong about the specific form, but directionally accurate enough that the outcome would have been severe. He told her, with the particular flatness of someone reporting meteorological data, that the matter had been addressed. She didn't ask what that meant. He told her that the man who had arranged it was not a rival organization, but someone within his own structure, which was, he said, the kind of information that reshaped certain operational assumptions he had been working with for some time. He said this last part looking directly at her, and she understood that he was telling her something about the nature of his world, not to frighten her, but because he had decided she was someone who deserved an honest accounting of the environment she had stumbled into. Then he said something that she had not anticipated. He said that he had a problem, and that the problem was one he could not solve using the resources currently available to him, because the resources currently available to him had demonstrated quite clearly that their reliability was in question. The problem was not violent in nature, or at least he said it did not need to be. It was logistical and commercial, and required someone with specific qualities that the previous night had suggested she might possess. She asked him what qualities those were, and he listed them without hesitation, as if he had already composed the list and was simply reading it back to her. Attention to detail, composure under pressure, the ability to read a situation accurately at speed, the willingness to act on that reading without waiting for permission or consensus, and, he paused briefly before the last item, an absence of existing obligation to anyone in the current structure, which made her, he said, the most trustworthy person he had spoken to in recent memory. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about 3 years of sweet potatoes and pre-dawn loading and the specific exhaustion of building something small with your hands, grain by grain, day by day, in a city that had not asked you to come and would not ask you to stay. She thought about how much further that work would take her if she continued on the path she was on, and she thought about the white card still in her apron pocket back at the stall, and about what it felt like to stand in an alley at night and have the most dangerous man in the district bow his head in your direction over a shattered cup and a truth told plainly. She said that she would need to know more about the problem before she agreed to anything. He nodded as if he had expected nothing less. He began to explain, and as he spoke, Amara Diallo sat in the afternoon light above the Han River and listened with the same careful, measuring attention that had kept her alive and independent in this city for 3 years. And she thought, this is what a new life sounds like when it begins. Not a fanfare, not an explosion, just a door opening in a quiet room, and someone on the other side of it finally speaking to you as an equal, and you deciding in your own time whether to walk through.